Hello, I'm Claire Smith, welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be about Sana Jardin fragrances. So Sana Jardin have a total of 11 fragrances. I'm going to talk about all of them in this video and I'm going to rank them in my order of preference at the end. So if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith. I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history, perfume psychology, and I also just do these fragrance brand overviews and also fun perfume tags as well. So if that kind of thing interests you and you haven't already done so, then please do consider subscribing and please also like this video if you do enjoy this kind of content. So Sana Jardin, before we start, I'm just going to be completely transparent and say that I was gifted 2 of the 11 samples that I'm going to talk about in this brand video by the brand itself, and they gave me Revolution de la Fleur and also Venus of Verbena. So those are the 2 that I was gifted by the brand. The rest of the samples I came about by my own means. So Sana Jardin are a brand that were founded in 2017 and they seem to operate in a very socially conscious way. So first of all, they're cruelty free. Secondly, they are all entirely vegan. All of their fragrances are vegan. So the other interesting thing about the brand is the name itself. So Sana comes from Arabic and that means dazzling or radiant, and Jardin comes from French and that means garden. And I really feel that really sums up how the brand is and how the fragrances smell. So they're very much East meets West. So Sana Jardin actually sell fragrances in a number of formats. You can get 100ml bottles, 50ml bottles, 10ml travel sprays, 3x5ml little sets of fragrances in different moods, and you can also buy a discovery set as well. And also the fragrance brand, I've noticed, has sales around holiday time. So I noticed this last bank holiday they did have a 30% off sale. So I think if you do like any of these fragrances, then I would wait until a holiday to buy them because you'll probably get some money off them. So I'm just going to talk about each of the fragrances in turn now and just review them all for you. And I'm going to start off with the older fragrances. I'm also going to point out Sana Jardin's 3 best sellers so that you will know which ones are perhaps the more friendly ones, perhaps the ones that people are more likely to enjoy than the others. So the first fragrance I'm going to talk about is Sandalwood Temple. So Sandalwood Temple is a milky, sweet sandalwood to begin with, but actually the sandalwood seems to play peekaboo throughout this fragrance. It comes and it goes. So it may start off as milky and sweet, but then it quickly turns into a slightly spicier, but still quite creamy sandalwood. And it's definitely a lot woodier. So the woodiness, I think, comes from the other notes in this fragrance. So I think maybe the warmth comes from the cedar. Maybe that also adds a little bit to the spiciness of this, but also it's slightly smoky, which I think might be the Gaiac wood. The smokiness is not really overt. It's something you would only smell if you smelt the fragrance very close up, you know, like a fragrance reviewer does. But it just adds a sort of subtle interest really to this fragrance. Later on, it becomes that milky sandalwood again. And I've sort of had this sort of cycle with this fragrance throughout the life of this fragrance. It sort of seemed to come and go. And the milkiness really returned for the dry down. So in the final dry down, it was just this milky, sweet sandalwood that just seemed to go on and on. In fact, I could still smell this one a whole day later. So it really is a very long-lasting fragrance. But I would still say that this one's quite close to skin. I think if you want beast mode, you're not going to find it with Sandalwood Temple. It's quite a gentle one. So this fragrance is named Sandalwood Temple, and I kind of get that because it feels like the woody notes in this fragrance are supporting the sandalwood and really bringing out the other elements in the sandalwood that make the sandalwood stand out. And I love that kind of peekaboo kind of thing that's going on in the fragrance as you wear it. But this fragrance did also make me think of other sandalwood fragrances that I've tried. So it made me think of Palm Oil's Milky Musk most of all. I did think that it was quite similar to that one. Also, I own Peau Santal, and it did make me think a little bit of that one. But Peau Santal is quite distinctive because it has that saffron in the fragrance as well as the sandalwood. And that sort of makes that one a little bit different to this. Also, this made me think a little bit of Piano Santal by L'Orchestre Perfumes, but that fragrance is very much sweeter than this one. So hands up, I just like sandalwood fragrances. You know, there's nothing to dislike here for me. It's just a nice milky soft sandalwood. And I think this one's really likeable because that's proven by the fact that this one's in the top 3 bestsellers for the brand. And I can see why. There's just nothing to dislike here. And I think this is very signature scent kind of worthy, very wearable, and is something that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. So that's Sandalwood Temple. So the next one is called Savage Jasmine. I don't think they could have named this fragrance any better. So this is a really wild feeling, really strong, really sort of something that's slightly indolic, slightly animalic type of jasmine. If you don't like that in fragrance, then I would stay well away from this one. This is just a straight up strong, heady jasmine. It doesn't really go to too many places. It does dry down and it does sort of calm down a little bit, but really it's a jasmine all the way through, and it is very strong to begin with. I think with jasmine, when it's very natural and when it's kind of indolic, I smell various things that can be really off-putting to some people, but I quite like when I smell them with natural heady florals. So the two things that I think might put people off this is if you smell this really, really close up, it's very mildly indolic, and those indoles come off as something slightly fecal almost. And whilst that's not a strong thing, and whilst you would have to smell it very, very close up to get something along those lines, I think a lot of people aren't going to enjoy that. And I know I sound mad saying that I do enjoy that, but it's so subtle and it just adds interest to this fragrance. And that is just how natural jasmine smells. It just does smell like that. And also because of the strong jasmine in this fragrance does teeter along that sort of line of those plasticky florals. I've smelt that in other very natural floral fragrances like Moon Palace, and I quite like that, but I know that a lot of people don't like that. It's never really plasticky, but it does just keep you sniffing because it is along those lines. The only other fragrance I've smelt that really reminded me of this one was probably Lush Lust. So Lush Lust also has a ylang ylang, but it is basically a strong, indolic feeling jasmine fragrance. And yes, they do have similarities, but I think this one's a little bit smoother, a little bit nicer than Lush Lust. I think that this is probably one of my favourites of the collection, but I can see that this one is going to be polarising. It's not going to be a popular one. It's not something a designer would ever make. You're not going to smell this in the designer world, and I think this is what you pay for with niche fragrances, to smell things you don't normally smell and to get this kind of fragrance. Even though it's quite simplistic, even though it is just straight up jasmine, I just think it's really nicely done and it's one of my favourites. That's Savage Jasmine. So the next fragrance is called Celestial Patchouli, and this one I was really scared of because I don't normally like patchouli scented fragrances, but I did quite like this one, and that's because there's leather here. So this fragrance starts off as quite a cinnamon-based patchouli, which gives it a bit of a chocolatey feel. Quite often I smell chocolate when I smell cinnamon with patchouli, and this fragrance is no exception. As this dries down, you get some more sweetness from a powdery rose, but you mainly get a brown leather. So the brown leather here is very sort of almost worn. It's like a texture that's more like a suede or something that's a rougher leather, perhaps even a cracked brown leather, that kind of texture to this. It smells almost a little bit animalic to me in the dry down. And really it's the leather that seems to dominate over the patchouli in the dry down. The patchouli here is really quite subtle, and I think it's something that is really tamed by that chocolatey feel to this. And I really like this fragrance much more than I ever thought I would do, actually. I think I'd really like to snuggle up to someone who is wearing this one. I think it's just absolutely delicious with those kind of gourmand touches of the chocolate. And I also just really like the leathery feel. I just don't really feel this is entirely me though. And I don't think this is one that I would ever think about purchasing or, even a small amount of. But I did really enjoy trying this sample. And again, I would just love to smell it on someone else. This was actually quite strong, especially in the beginning. And it lasted a long time, but it was still quite a skin scent from an hour in or so. I think this one is well worth a sniff actually, especially if you like leather, especially if you like patchoulis that are more towards the chocolatey style of patchouli. So that's Celestial Patchouli. So the next fragrance is called Nubian Musk, and this one is more what I was expecting from the patchouli fragrance. So this really has those woody aspects of the patchouli, it has the greener aspects of the patchouli, and it also has quite a strong musk. And the musk here is not necessarily a clean musk, it's more of an animalic kind of musk. Also, this fragrance makes me think of beer. It makes me think of a really flat, really strong, quite yeasty feeling ale almost. It's something that really does make me think of fragrances with cassis in them. It makes me think of like an unsweetened, much more patchouli based version of something like Armani C, the old version. I think that fragrance with the cassis really has that kind of greenness and that kind of almost kind of pissiness that you get in this fragrance. And I think some people absolutely love that kind of animalic kind of feel to these fragrances, and other people don't. And I don't mind that, but I don't think this is something necessarily for me. I think I'd really like to smell this on somebody else. I think they would smell amazing in this, and I'd want to snuggle up to them because it just is that kind of beery smell. I absolutely love it when somebody kisses me and they've got a cold beer breath. That is something that I absolutely love. And this fragrance makes me think of that. So I can see that I would like this on somebody else, but I don't necessarily want to wear this myself. But I do think this one's very interesting. It is quite strong, not overpowering, and it's long lasting too. So that's Nubian Musk. So the next fragrance is called Berber Blonde, and this fragrance is really a celebration of orange trees. It's more about the greener aspects of the orange tree to begin with. So it begins with neroli and petitgrain, and really overall it's a green, almost citrusy leaning kind of fragrance. It's bright, it's uplifting, but it's also a little bit soapier in the dry down. So this fragrance, whilst it does open with the neroli and the petitgrain and it's green, but it's not overly bitter in the opening. It then becomes a little bit sweeter, almost honeyed in the mid, and also slightly waxy. By the time this dries down, it's gone a little bit more soapy, but it still has the sort of slight greenness and the slight bitterness from the neroli and also from the petitgrain. I think this kind of scent profile is just not necessarily me, and I think this one is just a big no for me. But I don't think this is a bad fragrance overall. There's nothing here that makes me think that's, you know, constructed badly or whatever. I really do like that honeyed feel in the middle. I like the opening of this fragrance. I'm just not so sure about the soapiness, and that's what really turns me off this one. But I think if you really like petitgrain, if you really like neroli and fragrances, this is probably a good one to check out. And this is actually one of their best sellers, so clearly a lot of people love this one. So that's Berber Blonde. So the next fragrance is called Jaipur Chant, and this fragrance really surprised me because I was expecting something quite heavy from this, because if you look at the notes, it's got tuberose, it's got jasmine, and it's got narcissus, but actually this is a really light, airy, bright, yellowy green feeling tuberose, and it's something that I think if you don't like heavy, bubblegummy, really strong white floral kind of tuberoses, you might like this fragrance if you like something a little bit lighter. So this one opens very, very strangely, and it's something that actually goes quite quickly, but it does make me think of the gherkins from a Big Mac. It is kind of spicy, but in a pickly spicy kind of way. That goes really quickly, and you're left with something that's almost a little bit fruity. It's a fruity tuberose, but the tuberose is joined by a greener, fresher jasmine and also an oily feeling narcissus. The narcissus, I don't think I'd actually identify it, but it just has an oily, petally feeling in the background. This fragrance actually dries down into a tuberose jasmine musk, but again it's pretty light, and overall it just feels greeny yellow really overall. I think this one is just really sunny, really uplifting, and I think it's just a scent profile that I like, I'm familiar with, but I've never really smelled anything this light with this scent profile before. I think it's a really nice one. I think this actually lasted, a decent amount of time. I wouldn't say this one's strong at all. It's really quite a light fragrance. But I think, this is worth trying. It's very different. So that's Jaipur Chant. So the next fragrance is called Tiger by Her Side. So this one is a very sweet, very warm, enveloping, resinous fragrance overall. So this starts out with patchouli and cinnamon, and that again comes off as something quite chocolatey to me. There's also amber, so it's quite warm. And as this dries down, it becomes more powdery, more resinous, and it begins to make me think of fragrances like Prada Amber and also fragrances like Chanel Coromandel. I think if you like those two fragrances but would like some cinnamon added to them, this fragrance really might be really up your street. So as this dries down further, it becomes more leathery almost. So you've still got that powdery resinous feel, you've still got that kind of slight chocolatiness, but also you've got the leathery feel. And I think that along with the amber really gives it a lot of warmth. I really like this one. I think that it's something that I've smelt a few times before in other fragrances that I've just named, but I think this one is a slightly different take on those fragrances. It doesn't feel quite as austere as Prada Amber did. It doesn't feel quite as rich as Chanel's Coromandel. It feels a little bit sweeter, a little bit more enveloping perhaps than those two fragrances. And I think this one's well worth checking out. On me, this didn't last ages. I got about 4 or 5 hours out of it. But I think this is still, you know, worth a sniff because it might not be your experience. So that's Tiger by her side. So the next fragrance is called Revolution de la Fleur, and this one was gifted to me by the brand, as I said at the beginning of the video. So this fragrance really opens with a really dense, really strong feeling, but clean feeling musk. It's very, very dense, the musk at the beginning of the fragrance. There's also a really tropical, honeyed, yellow feeling frangipani, which I really like. It's really creamy, and it's something that's quite rich and heady, but also quite sweet. In the background, there's some kind of citrus here as well, and that really adds that bright, uplifting, sunny feel to this fragrance. As this begins to dry down, about 30 minutes in, the musk really starts to disappear, and I really like this fragrance much more after the musk has sort of died down a bit. It's quite strong at the beginning. I think really as this dries down further, the citrus also begins to disappear, and actually the jasmine in this fragrance really amps up. So you get the jasmine, you get the frangipani, and you get that kind of overall creamy, honeyed sweetness in the dry down. It's really beautiful in the dry down, this one. I think this fragrance is just my kind of scent profile. I just really like sunny florals, and this one just ticks that box. I don't really like the musk at the beginning, but I think if you've smelt fragrances like Banda Medi by Maison Martin, if you've smelt fragrances like Francesca Dell'Oro, Fladenia, they're not exactly the same, but they're along the same lines. And this one is sort of in that genre. I think if you really like musky, tropical florals, this one might be for you. So that's Revolution de la Fleur. So the next fragrance is called Vanilla Nomad, and this is not what I was expecting from a fragrance called Vanilla Nomad at all. I was expecting something really based around vanilla, and yes, there's vanilla in the initial spray, but it's really very much more a resinous feeling fragrance overall. So there's frankincense here, so you've got a bit of a citrus kind of feel in the opening, but also in the dry down, you've got that more sort of powdery benzoin going on. This fragrance overall really just took me back to being at uni. It took me back to going to a shop in Nottingham called Ice 9 and just smelling those kind of sweet, incensey smells in that shop. It also took me to earlier childhood and smelling sweets flavoured with strawberry, sort of strawberry push pops, strawberry lollies even. There's nothing strawberry about this fragrance. I don't know why I'm smelling strawberries, but I'm smelling kind of sweet, boiled sweet kind of strawberry smells really in this fragrance. Only at points, only in the middle of the fragrance. I thought this fragrance was really interesting. It didn't really change too much throughout its life. It just got a bit more powdery, a little bit less citric, maybe a little bit woodier, perhaps a bit spicier in the dry down almost. But really overall, it's just a resinous, slightly vanillic fragrance really. This one I really did like, but I can't say this one lasted very long on my skin. It was sort of gone after about 3-4 hours, which surprised me because I thought a resinous feeling fragrance might last a bit longer actually. I did like it though, and I would recommend trying this one, especially if you don't just want a straight up vanilla, which is something that just doesn't interest me. So that's Vanilla Nomad. So the next fragrance is called Incense Water, and I was really expecting something more along the lines of incense, unsurprisingly with this fragrance, but really this is a very rose dominant fragrance. So this opens with a rose that is supposed to be Moroccan rose. I've never smelled Moroccan rose as far as I know. To me this smells like a mixture between Bulgarian rose, but it's not as dry as Bulgarian rose, and something like Typh rose. So Typh rose to me often smells a little bit sparkly almost, or even sort of peppery. It's got a fizziness to it somehow, Typh rose sometimes, and this fragrance has that kind of fizziness, so I'm assuming there's sort of black pepper, pink pepper, something like that in this fragrance that's giving me that kind of sparkliness. This fragrance actually really makes me think of another fragrance in my collection, but it's not as sweet as that fragrance, and that fragrance is Nina Ricci L'Extase Rose Absolue. So that fragrance has musk, it has patchouli, and it sort of becomes a little bit almost oudy. And this fragrance also has that almost oudy vibe, but with the musk and the patchouli. I think this fragrance is less sweet than the Nina Ricci, and it smells more natural than the Nina Ricci. The Nina Ricci really just smells quite artificial sometimes, but I kind of like that about it because it is kind of bright and out there and otherworldly almost than in a Ricci. This fragrance in the dry down, it's odd, but you get the raspberry in the dry down and it turns into a raspberry rose musk in the dry down, but with a little bit of patchouli. This on me lasted about 3-4 hours and then it was quite quiet really. I think this is one you probably have to respray, but it's lovely while it lasts. But I think if you really like rose dominant fragrances, this is one of the more interesting ones. So yeah, I like this, but it did make me think of other roses in my collection. So yes, it did make me think of that Nina Ricci, and it did make me think of Chopard Lover even though this fragrance doesn't have cinnamon, it doesn't have honey, but it definitely has those different types of roses in it. And I think actually, you know, if you do like rose, this is a good fragrance to check out. If you don't like rose, then stay well away because it is basically rose. So that's Incense Water. So their last fragrance is called Venus of Verbena. This one was released in 2023. It's their most recent release, and this particular sample was gifted to me by the brand. So this fragrance opens with a really bright feeling lemon verbena. And actually to me, this comes off as slightly limey actually in the beginning. It smells very green, but also very citric, but still quite floral. As this dries down, it begins to smell more lemony. So the lime disappears, smells more lemony, and it also becomes more oily, but it still stays quite floral overall. It's quite a soft fragrance, and it also turns a slightly woody almost. Very, very gently woody, but still with that kind of oily lemon in the background. As this dries down, this fragrance makes me think of like face creams, face oils, but with some kind of citrus base to them. It definitely does feel like a luxurious kind of moisturiser or something like that. It's got like a creaminess or an oiliness to this fragrance. I think if you really like, you know, like preserved lemons in oil, those kind of Italian lemons that you can buy in the supermarkets, then you will really like this fragrance. Really my favourite part was the opening. That was the bit that I really enjoyed. The dry down, not so much. And I just wanted to keep spraying this one just to get that opening back again. I think this just really has a really great first impression. But I think you need to wait for the dry down if you do try this one, especially if you're trying this in store. On me, this lasted a few hours. It was kind of very much a skin scent after about an hour and a half, 2 hours. But it probably lasted about 4 or 5 hours on my skin. I think this is definitely one of the quieter ones overall. So that's Venus of Verbena. So now my final thoughts on these fragrances. What did I think overall? I thought these were actually really nice. I thought they were good quality fragrances. I think though, if you want something super strong, these fragrances are not where it's at. I think there are some in this range that are incredibly long lasting, like Sandalwood Temple was really, really long lasting on me. But I don't think these fragrances are beast mode. I think they're generally on the quieter side. I have noticed that these fragrances are sold at least in Anthropologie stores in the UK. They might be sold in other Anthropologie stores abroad. So those stores might be a great opportunity to go and try these fragrances for free and see what you think. So now I'm going to rank these fragrances in my order of preference, and I'm going to start off with my lowest rank fragrances. And I'm just going to say before I start, I don't dislike any of these. There are things that are definitely more my scent profile than others, but I think they're all pretty good actually. So my lowest rank fragrance is Berber Blonde. I just don't really like neroli and petitgrain in fragrances, but actually this one was probably one of the least offensive neroli fragrances I've ever tried. It did have quite a soapy dry down though, and that really killed it for me. But I think if you really like neroli and petitgrain, that one could be for you. Number 10, I'm going with Venus of Verbena. I absolutely love the opening. The dry down, not so much. I am not a fan of preserved lemons, and I think that's probably why I didn't like that one quite so much. But if you are, that could be for you. Number 9 is Nubian Musk. I absolutely love that Sana Jardin were daring enough to use a dirty, kind of furry smelling musk. It smells almost like a kitten, Nubian musk. It's got that sort of, nuzzly furriness. I just don't think Nubian musk is me. I would love to smell it on someone else though. I think you could smell absolutely delicious in Nubian musk. So that's my number 9. Number 8 is Incense Water. I just have similar fragrances already to Incense Water. I think that scent profile is quite a common one. And I just like Nina Ricci, like Sass Rose Absolute. I like Chopard Love. I just have no need for this fragrance, but I still think it's a great rose fragrance. And if you like roses, that's the one to check out, Incense Water. Number 7 I'm going to put as Revolution de la Fleur. I just really didn't like the musk at the beginning of that fragrance, but the rest of it was right up my street. It was just really creamy, really rich, really heady, and I thought it was really nice in the dry down, but just quite quiet. So that's Revolution de la Fleur, that's number 7. Number 6 is going to be one of their best sellers, Tiger by Her Side. So Tiger by Her Side was absolutely fine, but I've been through an entire bottle of Prada Amber and I'm kind of over it, but I did think this was nice. I really like the cinnamon aspect of this, and I can see why it's popular. So that's number 6, Tiger by Her Side. Number 5, I'm going to put a Celestial Patchouli. I'm not normally a massive fan of patchouli and fragrances, but I really liked it because it wasn't just a straight up patchouli fragrance. I really like the chocolatey feel, and that's why I'm rating that one as number 5. Number 4 I'm putting is Vanilla Nomad, and that's because it took me on a scent journey back to my childhood with that sort of strawberry sweet feel, and it also took me on a journey back to when I was at university. It took me to a memory of a shop that I used to go to, and I think that's why I'm ranking that one quite so highly. I just loved that it wasn't a straight up vanilla fragrance. I loved that it wasn't just something that I've smelt before, something quite boring, and I appreciate that. So that's Vanilla Nomad, my number 4. So I'm going to cop out with the top 3 because I just liked all 3 of them. Number 3, I'm going to choose Jaipur Chant. I just really liked that it was a greener feeling, fresher feeling, more kind of energetic feeling tuberose fragrance. And I thought that that was something I hadn't smelled before in other fragrances. And I thought that was interesting. So that's why that's number 3, Jaipur Chant. Number 2, I'm putting as Sandalwood Temple. This is a milky sandalwood. There's nothing to dislike here. It's something that has that kind of peekaboo feeling that I just really like. It's one of their best sellers. I can see why. It's just really nice. And even though it reminded me of a few other fragrances that I've tried, I just thought this was one of the best examples that I've smelt. So that's Sandalwood Temple. And in first place, I'm putting Savage Jasmine. I just like Jasmine, and this is well named. This really is just a straight up, very wild feeling Jasmine. And I think this is going to be love or hate. There's nothing in between. I think if you like fragrances like Lush Lust, you'll probably really enjoy this one. And I think this is daring. This is something that you don't smell in normal designer fragrances. And this is what you're looking for with these kinds of brands. So that's Savage Jasmine, my number 1. So that's the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, then please press the like button, and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. So please let me know, have you tried anything from Sana Jardin? What do you think of the brand? Do you like the ethos behind the brand? Do you have a favourite from Sana Jardin? I'd be really interested to know. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.